Well, in part two of my last video, I talked about how I overcame my health challenges and where my doctor just told me that I have a cancerous tumor. And just to remind you, he said that we won't know more until we've done testing. And I was in complete denial. This is a story of how I dealt with the situation and the valuable lessons I learned from Steve Jobs and natural medicine. I remembered from the 1980s, Ronald Reagan had cancer. And he said, and they said to Ronald Reagan, well, what's it like having cancer, Mr. President? And he said, I don't have cancer. I had something inside me that had something inside of it that had cancer, and the doctors yanked it out. So I don't have cancer. I'm cancer free. And I tried to adopt this attitude. You know, I was thinking, should I tell anybody? Should I not tell anybody? Of course, my closest loved ones knew, but it was just really hard. Part of my process was, here I'm a natural healer, right? Here I'm taking fruits and vegetables and eating nuts and seeds, and I'm doing all this good stuff. Why did this have to happen to me? I took medicinal mushrooms for years. That's supposed to protect me. What's going on? Well, part of it, I have to tell you, to cut to the chase, is that cancer runs in my family. And I witnessed both of my parents' deaths due to cancer. Ironically, both of my parents had brain cancer. My mother had endometrial cancer, which they call uterine cancer and brain cancer. And my dad had lung cancer and brain cancer. And for my mother, basically it meant that she had a 5-hour cancer operation. And after that operation, she was an Alzheimer's patient. She went from saying, you know, Andrew, I don't feel great, but I'm a 75-year-old woman. I feel pretty good. I don't feel like somebody has cancer all over their body. So she went into the 5-hour operation. She never recovered. And like I said, she was kind of like an Alzheimer's patient after that. My dad was close to the genius level, but with brain cancer, he started having seizures and he started dropping his intellect. And I remember, as a joke, close to my dad's death, I said, well, Dad, I'm going to the high-tech conference tomorrow. And he said, oh. And I said, they call me Gramps at the high-tech conference. And my dad goes, ha, 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 ha. So he had to think about it a minute, that I was going to be one of the older guys at the high-tech conference. So I had a meeting with a surgeon. So basically the gastroenterologist confirmed that it was cancer, and he referred me to a surgeon at the hospital. And so I met with the surgeon over Zoom, and they still didn't know a lot about what stage of cancer I was in and if it had infiltrated other areas. And so what makes cancer so deadly is that it can start out in one area and then it can spread all over the body. And that's exactly what happened to both of my parents. And then typically when that process goes on, that they're going to be dead in 1 to 5 years in terms of standard Western medicine, even if they get the treatment. So knowing all this about cancer, it was just really hard to deal with. And there was part of me that thought, well, maybe I stick my head in the sand enough, I'll wake up and everything will be fine. And but as the day came that I had to go to the hospital, I started getting really nervous. And I was, even though I had stopped taking antibiotics before I went to the hospital, I was still dealing with abdominal pain because there was something alien and foreign and evil inside me that I had to get expunged. And so one of the things before I went to the hospital is they made a big thing about COVID testing. And they said, we need proof. We are not going to do any surgery unless you have proof of COVID testing. So I had ranged for PCR test, which many people know those are the state-of-the-art tests. But the day before I was to be scheduled in surgery, they said, no, this is a rapid PCR test. we're going to cancel your surgery if you don't do a regular PCR test. So he arranged for me to go to San Francisco to a special place to get a PCR test. And so I went into the hospital. I was really kind of nervous. And of course, before admitting, I had to check to see I'd had a COVID test, and it was negative. And finally they said, do you have any, I think it was a nurse, said, well, do you have any questions for me? And I go, yeah, I'd like to know you guys' COVID procedure and protection policies. I said, you're at much greater risk to me than I am to you. And they're like, yeah, we're all tested. And yeah, if you want any information, you can send a written letter to the administration. Then they said, well, would you consent to a transfusion? I said, I have no problem with the transfusion, but is the blood screened for COVID? And then the nurse was like, oh my dear, I don't know. I don't know. And then a doctor comes in. I think he's like a resident, teaching hospitals. And he goes, well, sir, you don't get COVID through blood infection. You get it through respiratory infection. And so, therefore, we do not test the blood for COVID. So that's really interesting. And so the next thing he do is he said, here, take these, right? I mean, I've never had doctors do that to me in the hospital. Here, take this, right? I go, well, what is it? He said, it's gabapentin. And I go, well, why am I taking this? Because it'll take the edge off the pain. So then I remember being wheeled into the operating theater, and I do remember the same thing. There was no countdown. I was asking them about that, and then 1 minute I was talking, and the next minute I was completely out. So it was the day after my operation, and I was just in terrible abdominal pain. The morphine and all the anesthesia drugs must have worn off. And so there I was, like, lying in my bed and in my hospital bed. And I think I had the covers over my head. I was just a very weak moment in my life. And I'm thinking, I shouldn't have gotten this operation. I should have just done natural therapies. And then I wouldn't have to be in all this pain. And then I thought of Steve Jobs. My God, that's how Steve Jobs died. He said, oh, I'll just do the natural therapies. What do oncologists know? They don't know anything. The problem is that certain cancers, especially like the cancer Steve Jobs had, move very, very quickly. And in general, the natural treatments, if they work, tend to work kind of slowly. And so what happened with Steve Jobs is that the natural therapies he tried, he used exclusively, couldn't touch the fast trajectory of his cancer. And so about 9 months, I believe, it was after he had been taking nuts and seeds and herbs, he decided to switch gears and use Western medicine for his pancreatic cancer. But by then, it was too late. And that's what you'll hear in the news. By then, it was too late. Not necessarily true, because people with pancreatic cancer typically only live about 2 years after diagnosis, even if they get chemotherapy. So, but the bottom line is that Steve Jobs was an idiot. He had plenty of resources. He could have seen the best doctors in the world, and he could have used his natural therapies to augment the Western therapies. And maybe not, he'd still be alive today. But for me, it was, I'm on the right path here. I got it out. It was something bad. I want to say evil. It was evil and it was toxic. And I got it out. And that was the right thing to do. Now we need to pray that there's no chemotherapy and that I can strengthen my body with herbs and mushrooms and diet. Looking back at my experience with cancer, I realized it was a wake-up call for me. As someone who's always been committed to natural healing, I thought I was doing everything right to prevent the disease from happening to me. My advice to anyone going through a similar experience is don't give up on natural healing, but don't ignore Western medicine like Steve Jobs did. Find a balance that works for you and keep an open mind. And more importantly, don't lose hope. Cancer is a tough opponent, but with the right mindset and support, you can beat it. I know I will. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please comment below and be sure to like and subscribe to help us grow our channel. Thanks for joining us